It's not true, according to the usual story, that Eartha White never married. As she had been prophesied a storehouse for the people and named after the earth itself, Eartha White married the people. When James Jordan died, Eartha grieved by marrying the community. Though the Union Benevolent Association had been formed the year after she was born, it wasn't until James died that Eartha herself revived it. Its original purpose was to provide for the indigent persons of color in the city. After the Great Fire of 1901 began on a La Villa street corner, quickly left La Villa, and burned most of adjacent Jacksonville to the ground, Eartha saw the widespread destitution in the ruins. She saw the crowds of people who'd lost everything living in tents by the ashes. So she campaigned for funding, and 1 year later, workers had finished construction of the colored old folks' home in the Black East Jacksonville area of Campbellton, or Campbell's Addition. In 1902, it was, quote, a big 2-story house with a flanking gallery and 2 or 3 hound dogs wagging their tails and the smell of hot cornbread and other delicious victuals. There's not one who pays 1 cent for their keeping, Eartha wrote, and this institution has no income except what the public gives, and this amounts to a very little. So Eartha wrote letters and paid visits to businesses and well-known city residents who might be able and willing to contribute any little thing. She drove her horse and buggy around town, negotiating and picking up loads of kindling or leftover chicken or the remnants of a corn harvest to bring back to the old and penniless who lived at the old folks' home. An old blind man left Eartha the black and white dog that had helped him find his way around Jacksonville for 11 or 12 years. The old man's name is lost. His dog's name was Lily White. She was all he had to bequeath. Along with the orphanage, Eartha ran a milk fund committee to bring milk to poor children. She ran a maternity home and daycare service on Milner Street near the old folks' home. The free milk Eartha distributed to needy children through the public school system coincided with her campaign to ameliorate tuberculosis in black children. Tuberculosis has been by far the most deadly bacterial infection in the history of the world. In New England, by 1800, tuberculosis was the cause of 1/4 of all deaths, and 1 of every 250 people suffered from the disease. Jacksonville's black community died from tuberculosis in far greater numbers than the city's whites. Early in the 1930s, Eartha took 86 children suffering from tuberculosis to American Beach on Amelia Island, where she had arranged for nurses and doctors to care for them. Abraham Lincoln Lewis of Afro-American Life Insurance had secured and purchased the Amelia Island beachfront property to open a public beach that black people could legally enjoy during segregation. And since Eartha's American Beach relocation of tubercular children saved several lives, she decided to open a tuberculosis hospital for black people who couldn't receive health care in so-called white medical facilities. She opened the tuberculosis home on Milner Street in 1936, after a black man's neighbors found him dead in a collapsing car barn with a can of beans in his hand. The car barn was his last resort, since people had been too afraid of his bloody cough to offer him any help. Tuberculosis bacilli had been found in Egyptian mummies from 6,000 years ago. In the 1800s, people called the disease consumption because it consumed its victims. Eartha visited each of her tubercular patients. She quickly grew to know them and to love them. When consumption consumed the women in her hospital, some of them became almost as small as her. And though she boasted later of never having had the time to marry, surely she never forgot the fiancé of her adolescence, James Jordan, who wrote her long-distance letters when he could hardly sit up to do so. Constantly he coughed, dramatically his energy drained, his weight plummeted. I'm really not well, but better than I have been, and at work with Mr. Richard, he wrote. When I get in at night, I feel like doing nothing but going to bed. And then I am not getting entirely well, though lots better than I was when I wrote you last, and I'm looking better. I shall make an attempt to go to work tomorrow, my old employee. And then, but dear, I keep so poorly and weak that when I get home at night and get a little supper and get through with other little things, nothing suits but bed. And lastly, Eartha, dear, you don't want any photo now. I have lost 16 pounds. Then I haven't the means at present anyway. My doctor bill keeps me to the mark. At present, for 21 treatments, it is $2 a day. The weather is very pleasant at present. Eartha, I must say I am tired. Good night. Write to me, though. All sins love. I really can hardly keep up some days.